Hello everyone, I'm John Higgins, contributing writer to Film and TV Now and curator of the YouTube channel John Higgins Film Review, and I'm delighted to welcome one and all to this interview special with writer-director Mervyn Marshall, who is the creative heart of a new short film called Banshee, which has just been generating a lot of buzz on the festival circuit and has just been one of the nominations at the British Short Film Awards, which I was lucky enough to attend the other day. It's a unusual tale, horror tale, told in still images, I suppose, of a woman's encounter with a banshee in a far-off location. So, Mervyn, good morning to you.
Hiya, good morning to you too.
So, let's start off. I mean, what exactly was the start-off point for the short?
The start-off point was it's always this kind of thing I go back to, and I'm never entirely sure of where it initially generated from. I know the decision to shoot on still photos came about as a way to kind of push my producer towards getting this over the line whilst reducing the budget significantly, because when you're shooting with still images, you don't need to worry about sound, you don't need to worry necessarily so much about continuity, about a lot of the other things that kind of those hidden costs in producing a kind of small short film. So it started off as a sort of budget-based decision, really. Yeah, that was one of the driving forces behind it. It came out of, I'm sure you're familiar with Chris Marker's Le Jeté, the French film from the 1960s, which is the only other kind of still image based short film that I know. And we had to do an assignment on that in university many moons ago, about a decade ago, where we re-recorded the sound for that. So I got this realization that when you have this kind of mixture of voiceover and music and image, you had a lot of potential to kind of generate any kind of emotional tone that you wanted. And I kind of wanted to explore that with horror, because I'm a horror guy. So that was kind of what pushed, or that's where the genesis of the idea came from. But the actual kind of creative decision, yeah, was pretty much budget based.
Well, you actually have answered my question in part. Now, what's interesting is that you still get quite a good, you get kind of moments of jolting moments because of this whole thing and it's an unusual style. So I'm just curious to know, if you're, is there something that you kind of see where, when you've tried to shoot something like traditionally with moving footage and stuff like that, I mean, where do you feel if, for example, you had the budget to shoot it normally, would you have felt that when you actually went into the editing room, you would have actually seen that maybe it would have been better in the style that you've done for this thing? Or would you feel that in terms of what you're trying to do, because often, I watch shorts and you're kind of wondering the intricacies and the aesthetics and everything else. So just tell us a bit more. If you wanted to go down that route, what would you have done differently?
Yeah, I think the thing that probably would have changed is the construction of the individual little vignettes or the scenes that kind of make up the film, because there's like 4, maybe 5 scenes, and they're very simplistic in their blocking and in their general arrangement. And I think that was part of how we kind of had to shoot, because we were on stills. So what we would do is we would get the actors and they would maybe do a full run through of the scene and we would see how it was kind of shaping up. But then for subsequent run throughs, we would sort of yell stop at any given moment. And it would sort of, our DP would go in and he would photograph them kind of frozen in time at specific angles and specific perspectives. So we didn't have a lot of like complex movement or anything like that in our blocking. It's all very simple. Person walks here, person does this, person does that, and I think shooting that normally would not have created anywhere near an interesting, I don't think it would have been a particularly interesting or effective horror movie or any kind of movie if that had been shot live action. I think you'd have to go back and address the fundamental kind of design of the sequences and the kind of ebb and flow that they have.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about your cast. I mean, you have a very simple cast, but just tell us a bit more about them and where you got them and what do they bring to the production?
Yeah, I mean, we just sourced them from one of the kind of Facebook and networking groups over here in Belfast, called Media Therapy Group. We put up a casting call and we got a good number of responses for our protagonist, the girl. We got less so responses for our Banshee mother character. So our Banshee mother character is played by Luna Callow, who is a wonderful actress. I've just finished another short with her, another horror sort of short with her, that kind of does a lot of similar things to Banshee in terms of what it's about kind of relationships between mothers and daughters, and how that kind of is a relationship rife with the tension for supernatural terror. So but she's a wonderful actress. She also did the voiceover for us. We got her back to do the voiceover for it because she just me and her just have a very kind of sort of creative understanding. I don't need to direct Luna very much. She tends to just get what I'm going for straight off the page, which is nice. And then Una, I don't know if you had the chance to see her. She was at the awards. Unfortunately, I was not. I was giving a conference paper up in Newcastle on the same day as the awards. But hopefully you had maybe had the chance to meet Una. But yeah, she walked into the audition room. And our DP who was there just looked and was like, yeah. And we didn't really need to do anything else after that. She just had that exact look that we were looking for, that sort of that kind of quality of someone who was there but could also be kind of not there at the same time. I think she has a brilliant face for that, I think.
So let's talk a little bit about your production team. I mean, you were shooting on in locations, and tell us all about how long you took to shoot. I mean, what were the challenges against it? Because there are some really wonderful locations in this. I mean, they really come to town. So tell us a bit more about those elements.
Yeah, so the production itself had some minor hiccups, including our amazing makeup woman called Stacey Brown. We were shooting in the mountains in the Mourne mountain range, which is a range of mountains in County Down in Northern Ireland that I photograph a lot. I've done exhibitions on them. And I just it's a place I found a real kind of sort of creative homeland for myself. I find it is a place I find very very invigorating and very very exciting. So it's also a place that has a lot of power in terms of its kind of mystical qualities to it. I think it's got a lot of kind of various different kind of folklore, kind of rich kind of folklore history to it. And during our kind of production, during our location scout, we encountered a number of local people who had Banshee stories from the spot that we were shooting, which was not intentional. We did not know that going in. We just kind of discovered that. But yeah, our wonderful makeup lady actually broke her foot on her way up to the mountain range where we were shooting in on the first day. And she came back the second day, which was a real achievement. So must have done something right. Our general production was actually very, very straightforward, very easy. Everyone in the crew seemed to have a great time, which is always a good thing. Can always be a kind of tricky thing when everyone's having too good of a time. But yeah, the funniest kind of point from our first day up in the mountains was the Blue Loch is a wonderful place for a swim, and I would kind of go there a couple of times a year and have a swim, generally in kind of the warmer seasons. And we shot in September, and we had this. It took a couple of hours to get Luna into her Banshee gear, get her into her costume, get her makeup ready, and by the time she was ready, a busload of school children had come up for their first like little school trip of the year. And you know, they see a film crew, they see a bunch of people standing around, they sort of get the giggles, they start laughing, you know. And Luna, when we got her into position, she just lets out this ear-piercing, horrifying scream, and because of the mountains, that echo just bounced off all of the mountains. And silence, just everything went super quiet after that. The kids looked traumatized. They moved on pretty quickly after that, because I think that was something they were not really anticipating. But yeah, that was at the point where we were like, okay, this is going to be pretty scary, I think. So that went really well. And our second day was in a kind of privately owned kind of property called Myra Castle, which is a fascinating place. And I have a very talented producer who is excellent at getting good deals on locations. So he managed to talk the owners of that bank, because they rented out previously to the Frankenstein Chronicles and other film crews. So they had this kind of standardized charge of around £2,000 a day, and we talked them down to 200, which was nice, you know. So we had a couple hours in there, and it was a fascinating place. In fact, I don't know if might be a few shots of it in the film, but when we came in, they had a storm the night before, so they had about 2,000 windfall apples, like just lying all over the kitchen that they kind of collected and counted, which was really interesting. We looked for a way to kind of get them into the film, but it didn't really happen. But yeah, fascinating place.
All right. So, I mean, you've actually mentioned again, you've answered part of my question in the last answer, but I mean, you've talked about it being rooted in Irish folklore. I mean, I'm curious to know what fascinates you about the subject, and what is it? I mean, are there kind of, because we often see them traditional horror monsters and images, and I'm just curious to know, given the richness of Irish folklore, both the North and South. I mean, are there any kind of characters that have not been explored in cinema that would make really great antagonists for vulnerable people?
Yeah, it's interesting. I know that there's a kind of current climate of Irish horror going around at the minute. You know, we just finished up the Belfast Film Festival here, and I know we had an entire part of the program was dedicated to new Irish horror, which was really interesting. But I think that they're starting to sort of mind the kind of intricacies and the nuances and the uniqueness of kind of Irish folklore for specific characters. I'm not much of an expert myself. My Banshee is explicitly more cinematic in its roots. I don't know, I'm sure you are familiar with Jack Clayton's The Innocents from 1961, the Turn of the Screw adaptation starring Deborah Carr, which is one of my favorite films. I wrote about it for my PhD thesis. And I saw that when I was far too young, and it has that image of Miss Jessel the ghost on the lake, and to me that was an image that I saw when I was maybe a bit too young for it, and it stuck with me, and it burned into my memory. And it wasn't just the kind of creepiness of that image; it was the sadness that came along with it, the melancholy. And I think that's one of the things that drew me to the Banshee myth, was that it's sort of, there's a melancholy, there is a grief to it that is about the way in which we experience, or the way we kind of have a knowingness of grief. You know, we're preparing ourselves mentally for something when the Banshee appears to us, you know. And that was what really kind of drew me into the film, until to the idea of the story, is this fact that I could position this kind of spectral entity, this monster, at the beginning of the story, and then tell that story in reverse, which is kind of the opposite of the usual kind of horror narrative structure, you know. So that was the thing that I'm more interested in, the kind of cinematic realm than necessarily than the actual folklore, you know.
Okay, so we got to talk, because you have mentioned just your PhD, and that's the next question, because I'm looking at your background and stuff. Now, I understand you are working on a PhD about 50s and 60s horror. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's actually just a little bit out of date. I finished that a few months ago. So I did my PhD was on the kind of relationship between the moral panic in the newspaper that surrounded like the Hammer horror films and Peeping Tom when they came out in the end of the 50s and in the beginning of the 1960s. So it was a kind of lengthy ordeal of studying kind of how anxieties about horror become kind of bound up in anxieties about other kind of political or cultural issues. Particularly, actually, in the case of my thesis, was the family, which was an interesting one. So you'd have film critics kind of calling these films and the filmmakers all sorts of things, and then the review, they would have a line or two about how it's up to the parents to stop their kids from wanting to see this stuff, and mothers need to stop going to work because they're not there to look after their kids and stop them from sneaking off to see the Stranglers of Bombay or anything like that. So
yeah, I have to say that it sort of conjures up images of when I was a teenager, the video nasty paint. What's interesting about that whole period, the funny thing is we often, when we think of the VHS era of the early 80s, is that everybody was thinking, everybody in the world in the UK probably spent their time watching 23 brutal movies like Cannibal Holocaust, when in reality, the reality of going to a video store is, me and my family used to go down and watch, the Deer Hunter, or, there's a lot of titles that people seem to miss. It's weird. It's kind of, you know, the whole thing is that, you know, we would watch things like Taxi Driver and The Deer Hunter, First Blood. And what's crazy is the fact that, and you have pointed out that the actual craziness of it is that with horror today, for example, when, you know, like the video nasties of the 80s, actually, because we're more informed and because we've got more savvy film fans, we're aware of it. So it is an interesting one. I certainly would love to learn a bit more about that and sort of
absolutely,
get a reflection, because it'd be great. So let's just quickly get back to the short itself. I mean, obviously, would you like to expand? Obviously, you've done it a certain way for the short. Do you feel that you could explore the ideas that you've got in this short into a feature idea, or do you feel this is it? You're not going to do anything with this?
Well, I have sort of in my head, I've mapped out a kind of little small trilogy of what I would call the family ghost stories, and they're all sort of about exploring this relationship between family and ghosts in the past and trauma. So I'm currently working in post-production on one, which again it stars our Banshee Luna, and it's a ghost story in the more traditional sense, in that it's essentially a monologue, a 10-minute long monologue of a woman kind of recounting a ghost encounter that she had. But it's more explicitly about the kind of effect that had on her relationship with her mum, than it is about the encounter with the ghost itself. It's something, as a film I always wanted. I'm a big sucker for monologues. You know, I'm a Cassavetes fan, a Bergman fan. So, you know, like I've always wanted to kind of write that kind of a story. But yeah, you know, I've at the minute I haven't any real kind of aims to ever return to a picture or a still image based short or feature at all. That one was, I think it took us about 4 years to edit Banshee, on and off, you know, of course, but it gave you so much creative control in the way you could arrange your sequences and what you could even do to the images themselves. There's so many shots in Banshee, and I don't know how my cinematographer feels about this, or my photographer really, how he feels about it, but I've so many images where it's been shot as a mid or a wide, and it's been cropped into a close up or an extreme close up. You know, you've so much control over each individual image, that it became a point of it needed to cut, like time needed to be cut on that, you know, like I needed to stop having that the full kind of breadth of experimentation that I could do with it. So I teach film here at Queen's University Belfast, and I show it to my students sometimes, and I say, you know, I show you this with the idea of what you can do in 10 minutes, you know, as a short film, but do not ever do a still photo film unless you're prepared to suffer.
So obviously, I mean, you've answered one question I was going to ask you about your cinematic influence, Cassavetes and all that. I mean, I'm just curious to know, in terms of when you're working with students, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the fact that you teach film and stuff. I mean, where do you feel you can mentor and influence students, you know, in terms of what the positive potential of what film can be? Because obviously these people are committed to, I guess, 2 or 3 years of their life to kind of do it. And then of course there's the uncertainty of when you go out there. But, you know, I know this, you know, having been around the indie festival circuit, you know, it is a challenge that people just getting, you know, it's an achievement getting a film made, but then of course getting it out there and showing it, like Banshee, for example. So I just wanted to touch on that in a way that, you know, what do you try and impart in your students, you know, in terms of getting the best out of them?
To be honest, for me, the thing I emphasize the most with my students is to steal everything that isn't nailed down. Like, that is where their skills come from. When you're young and you haven't been able to, when you haven't kind of had that necessary life experience, that necessary kind of, you've been through those various kind of stages of life to kind of find your own kind of filmmaking talents and voice. It's all about where your influences at this age and where you draw from and how you stitch things together that haven't been stuck together. You know, it's very funny when people who know me and have been who've been in kind of had dealt with various movie nights and like my girlfriend, for example, we've been together for 10 years, and she said to me after seeing Banshee in the cinema for the first time, she looked at me and she went, "There's so much of you in that." And I didn't quite kind of, everyone else who sees it says it's like something they've never seen before. But anyone who knows me turns to me and goes, "You stole that from that film. You stole that from that film." And it's very true. You know, there are shots that were stolen from David Lynch. There's bits that are stolen from Silent Hill games. There's bits that are stolen from Cries and Whispers. So to me, it's always about not necessarily being original, telling a story that hasn't been told or anything like that. It's about bringing together the things that make you you, and translating that into your practice, you know. So that's the thing I like to emphasize, particularly with my students anyway.
Okay, so let's go back to the actual context of the short itself. I mean, you mentioned when you were shooting that there were little strange things happening, and you had, like, I think one person had a broken foot. So
Yeah.
are there things you've discovered when you were making, forget about the actual way you presented it. I'm just curious about the filmmaking process. I mean, were there things that you've discovered about the Banshee itself that you kind of think, I never knew what a Banshee was? And how frightened are you of the spiritualism of what a Banshee is? I mean, is it something that scares you personally?
It's interesting. I've never kind of looked at it like that. I don't think so. I think I'm more drawn to her as a figure, as something I have a lot of sympathy for. It's that kind of eternal grief that she seems to be sort of caught in, and it sort of represents a kind of danger, certainly to the characters in the film. I don't know if I would necessarily say I'm sort of scared of the supernatural as much as I am sort of fascinated by it and drawn to it, and have a kind of deep empathy for it, I suppose. But yeah, our film was sort of generally, I mean, when I did the kind of general background reading that was required for the Banshee, I figured that it was one of those things that, like a lot of folklore, has so many different kind of defining characteristics and traits over time. For example, some of the Banshee myths and stories and encounters that you'll read, sometimes she's very beautiful, sometimes she's very old, sometimes she's quite small, sometimes she's huge, sometimes she flies, sometimes her eyes are bleeding, sometimes, you know, she has green hair. There's all these different sort of variations in the kind of myth itself. So to me, it was important that she just sort of, the most important thing was, it felt like she was there. She felt like a physical presence that was actually rooted in the landscape itself, you know. So that was the thing that drew me to it, I think.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up with two final questions. I mean, let's talk a little bit about the festival experience of Banshee, which has been doing really well. I mean, it sort of made us, it sort of was made did a stir at the British Short Film Awards the other day. Just tell us a bit about your festival experience of that. What have been the big things that what are the positives that you've taken from it?
This is my first film on the festival circuit that I've made and produced, and sort of kind of been deeply involved in the festival run, that is. And for the thing that I think I learned the most was kind of about the type of festivals that you submit and where you're coming from as a filmmaker. That was a big kind of learning point for me. I quite a lot of our festival successes come down from word of mouth. I think the most success we had was it was picked up by the Northern Ireland Mental Health Arts Festival and played for a month at a gallery. Which, God help anyone in the vicinity, because they just had to hear that endless screaming and screaming for a month all day on a loop, which I think would probably drive me insane. So I've had to apologize to some people for that. But yeah, that didn't come from Film Freeway, you know, that came from word of mouth. And just it kind of, yeah, people kind of talking about it and asking to see it and asking and finding places to fit it in. So I guess for me, you know, if I was to, and as I say to students, you know, it's never, don't cold call festivals, don't cold submit, you know, get in touch with people, speak to people, and kind of, you know, give them a reason for your film to stick out and your name to stick out in their memory as well, you know.
Mm-hmm. And my final question is, generally, what are you most proud of about Banshee?
I think my favorite thing in the whole movie is the like 20-second long zoom in just after the mother sort of is lying on the bed, or is like sort of falling off the bed, and it just zooms in and zooms in on her face. Which, you know, if you've seen the film, you'll know the shot. I every time I went past and did another like edit of it, that scene got another second or two longer, and it just kept getting longer. And I really like that scene. I think that's the scene. When I've been in the audience for screenings, that's the scene that I know I've got them. You know, I've got the audience in the palm of my hand. I know that they're going with this film and they're on edge. That's the point. I kind of feel like you can feel the kind of atmosphere in the room change. Kind of. So.
Okay. So listen, Mervyn, thank you so much for your time and insights today. I mean, it's you've got everything to be proud of. I mean, seeing the film really gives an emphasis of all the hard work they put into. Just wrapping up, everyone, do check out this short if you check out the next independent film festivals that you can do, and do support your local film festivals, local indie films, and of course, any students like the ones that Mervyn teaches, because filmmaking is a challenge, whatever your background. For more interviews like this, you can go to my YouTube channel, John Higgins Film Review, and for more articles, interviews, and reviews of independent films, you can go to filmandtvnow.com, and please also check out my film resource website, whatmovie.co.uk, which was launched in 2022. So on that note, thank you very much, Mervyn.
Thank you so much for having me.